Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about crankbaits. But before I do, if you enjoy the content on our channel, please hit subscribe, hit the like button, and share with your friends. So I've got three different categories of crankbaits here. I've got the shallow diver, the medium diver, and a deep diver. And what I would consider shallow is anything from 0 to about 5, maybe 6 feet. Medium diver would be 5 to 6 feet to maybe 10, possibly 12 feet. And then a deep diver would be anything beyond 12 feet. And if you look at the sizes of them, it's pretty obvious. The deep diver is a bigger bait, bigger bill. Medium diver, smaller bait. Still has a pretty big bill, but much smaller than the deep diver. And then the shallow diver, smaller bait, smaller bill. Obviously, I cannot throw this on heavy line. I'm going to have to use light line and a more limber rod to be able to cast this because it really doesn't weigh a whole lot. And then as I move down to the deeper diver, I can go with a little bit heavier gear. The diving rate on your crankbaits is going to have a lot to do with the diameter of your fishing line. So if I'm using let's say a 30-pound braid versus a 15-pound braid, 15-pound braid, I'm going to be able to get these down a little bit deeper because they're smaller diameter. So you're going to have to factor that in. And basically what I do, I'll put on a crankbait. Most of the time I'm trying to make contact with something, with the bottom, with weeds, with rocks, with stumps. I'm trying to smash it into something. And when it deflects off of that, that's when probably 80% of your bites are going to come. So I'll put on the crankbait that I think I can dive down and be able to hit the bottom with. So with this deep diver is supposed to run 16 to 18 feet deep. I found in my experience, usually what they advertise on the packaging, you have a hard time getting it down to that depth. So if I'm throwing this 16 to 18 foot diver, and if I'm in 18 plus feet of water, I'm probably not going to be hitting bottom. But if I'm in 15 feet of water, I probably will be able to make contact with the bottom. And the way that you prevent yourself from getting snagged is when you start to feel it hit the bottom, I give it a pause. All of these baits float, so if I stop cranking, it's going to start to float back up. And so when I hit a stump, I hit some weeds, I hit the bottom, I'll pause it. In fact, with all crankbaits, you really don't want to just do a constant retrieve. You want to be changing up your retrieve. I'll maybe the first 5 or 8 cranks, I just crank pretty fast to get it to dive down to the depth. Once it's down to the depth, I'll slow it down. Every maybe 3 to 5 turns, I'll give it a little pause, maybe a 1-second pause. And again, I'm trying to get a little reaction from the fish rather than just a straight retrieve. Now, if you notice, all 3 of these bodies are kind of a fat body to it, and this bait has a thinner body. So you can buy crankbaits that have thinner bodies, flat sides to it, so to speak. Generally, these are better in colder water, and the fatter bodies are better in warmer or hot water. So you see a lot of the people deep diving, using deep diving crankbaits in the middle of the summer on Kentucky Lake, let's say, and usually they're using the fatter profile baits. But in the colder parts of the year, in the spring or late fall, a lot of fishermen will go to these flat-sided ones. So there's a few different body styles that you can think about when you purchase your crankbaits. In addition to the shallow diver, there's another category of crankbait called a square bill crankbait. If you look at these bills, this one, it has a square or straight edge to it. This one is more rounded. The advantage of a square bill crankbait is that when it hits a stump or a rock or something, it's going to really deflect off. And these become less likely to get snagged than this type of a bill. And so pretty much all square bill crankbaits are going to run in the neighborhood of 1 foot to maybe 4 or 5 feet deep. It's hard to find a square bill that runs much deeper than that. I probably use the square bills 90% of the time when I'm in shallow water rather than these little rounder built ones, although there is a time and place to throw these as well. but square bills are really, really good fish catchers in the shallow water. This one has rattles. This one has no rattles. The logic with fishing a bait without rattles is if you're in a very, very pressured lake, a lake that sees a lot of baits, the fish start to get tuned into these rattles. They start to realize that, okay, if I grab something to eat that has rattles with it, I'm going to have a bad experience. So the quieter ones become actually an advantage when you're fishing in pressured lakes. Also, in clear water, it might be a good opportunity to fish something without any rattles. In cloudy, dark water where a fish isn't going to be able to see as well, and they have to rely on the vertical line to catch the fish or to catch bait, then you may want the rattle. So there's a couple tips on when to choose rattles versus no rattles. Now, an entirely different category of crankbait would be these lipless crankbaits. You can see this has a bill or a lip. These all have no lip. The other difference between these are floaters. If you cast out pretty much any crankbait, it's going to float on the surface until you start to crank it, and this bill is what makes it dive. If I stop retrieving, most are going to float back up. There are some suspending varieties where they'll just stay neutrally buoyant. A lipless crankbait, almost all of them sink. So as soon as I cast it, if I don't retrieve, it's going to start to sink. And as I bring it in, it's going to have a very tight little shimmy. And these are fairly weedless. You can get them through a lot of weeds. If they do get hung, you just give it a quick twitch on your rod and you can free itself from the weeds much easier than one of these crankbaits. These, a lot of people call these rattle traps. Rattle Trap is actually a brand, kind of like Kleenex is a brand for tissues. Rattle Trap is a brand of lipless crankbait, but some people use the term rattle traps for this whole variety of baits. And you can see or hear why they get the name. These have a bunch of BBs in them, or ball bearings, and they can come in different. There's a higher pitch, there's a lower pitch, and this one has a different pitch altogether. And these baits really shine when the water's cold. Again, it's kind of like those flat-sided crankbaits. Early spring, these are really, really deadly, especially when fish are starting to pre-spawn, thinking about moving up into the flats. You can cover a lot of water with these. You can retrieve them very fast. They're also really good in the late fall as the water starts to cool down. And I've seen people catch really nice bass even into down in water temperatures down into the 40s on these rattle traps. And it seems counterintuitive. When that water's getting cold, you'd think the fish aren't going to chase a fast-moving bait. But there's something about these that they really, really attract the fish and get a reaction strike. You can fish these a number of ways, but like I said, they are going to sink. So I can fish this in lots of different depths by counting it down after I cast it. If I am in 10 foot of water, I can count it down to maybe 8 and then start my retrieve. So I hope that helps you out a little bit with some varieties of crankbaits and how to use them. Again, hit subscribe if you enjoy our channel.